Hello, my name is Jonathan Russert, and today I will be presenting Suum Cuique, studying bias and taboo detection with a community perspective, on which I worked with my colleague Osama Khalid and my advisor Dr. Padmini Srinivasan. First, what is bias? Well, imagine we have a classifier which classifies which hats are socially acceptable to wear. If we train the classifier on a data representative of the majority, we may find that only blue hats are acceptable. However, this would always label orange hats as unacceptable, even though different communities may find them acceptable. Thus, the classifier trained on the blue hats would show bias against communities which find non-blue hats acceptable. The same idea translates to language as well. Not all communities consider the same words taboo. By taboo, we mean offensive, hateful, or other such categories. Put another way, not all communities have the same language norms. Thus, if a classifier trains on data which favors the language norms of one community, it will unfairly classify the language of other communities. In our research, we identify bias by explicitly identifying the language norms of different communities. How do we then capture these language norms to represent a community and avoid bias? We fine-tune pre-trained BERT models on a community's language to determine how well the text aligns with a community. Well, what do we consider as a community? A community can be a group of people who share the same ethnic background or location, or can also be groups of people who share a common interest or problem. For this research, we look at 5 different ethno-racial groups represented on the website Reddit. We gathered comments from subreddits representative of each group. These comments were split into training and validation sets, which we used to train and then validate that our classifiers were truly capturing the language norms of each community. Thus, we have classifiers which capture language norms and can be used to identify bias. First, let's identify bias in taboo classifiers. How do we do this? Well, since your community classifiers measures how well a text aligns with a community, we would expect that a taboo text scores low on alignment when classified by a community classifier. On the other hand, since taboo classifiers measure if a text is taboo or not, then we expect that a taboo text scores high when classified by a taboo classifier. Thus, if a community classifier and taboo classifier agree, we would expect strong negative correlations between their scores. We examined 2 offensive language classifiers and an API developed by Jigsaw and Google, which assigns a toxicity score to a text. We then apply the community and taboo classifiers to text from the validation Reddit sets. Instead of a strong negative correlation, we find many 0 to positive correlations and thus bias across classifiers. Positive correlations show clear disagreement between taboo and community classifiers, which indicates bias. Though slightly better, 0 correlation is still not ideal since it will occur in cases where community's language is treated unfairly. Next, let's identify bias in datasets. We apply community classifiers to the taboo labeled portions of a dataset and measure which percentage of the taboo labeled dataset is highly aligned with the community classifier. Ideally, we would like to see 2 things. First, we would like the percentage to be low for any community. This is because if the percentage is high, then a taboo classifier trained on that data will learn to associate taboo language with that community's language and thus unfairly label language from that community. Second, we would like the percentages to be even across communities. This is also similar to the first point, since a community that has a much higher percentage is more likely to be unfairly targeted by a taboo classifier. We examined 10 different taboo labeled subsets. We find that almost all of the examined subsets exhibit bias against at least one of the communities. 6 out of 10 of the subsets show strong bias against the African American community. 3 out of 10 of the subsets show strong bias against the South Asian community, and toxic language subsets show bias against the Native American community. To get an initial idea of how well our community classifiers are representing a community, we conduct a small-scale user study. We ask humans from the communities to annotate comments as offensive or not. The comments selected are those which had high community language scores and high taboo classifier scores. If the humans find the comments offensive, then they will disagree with the community language classifier. If not, they will agree with the community language classifier and disagree with the taboo classifier, which will be showing bias. We ask 2 members from the African American community and 2 members from the South Asian community to label the text. We find that both South Asian annotators disagreed with the taboo classifier in 77% of the cases, agreeing only in 4%, thus agreeing with our community language classifiers. We also find that African American annotators disagreed with the taboo classifiers for 34% of the comments, which, though not as strong, still indicates cases where the taboo classifier is showing bias. We see that our community language classifiers are able to help identify bias. In the future, we would like to extend our human study to a larger scale to further verify results. Also, we would like to generalize and test our results beyond ethno-racial communities. Finally, we plan on using our community classifiers to help mitigate bias.